the workshops. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny meeting. Apologies if I wasn't audible before. This is just a short meeting to look at the recommendations that came out of some workshops that we and others were in this morning about the work programme for the next year for both our Scrutiny Management Board and the other scrutiny commissions. So the agenda was published a few days ago as per normal, but a supplement has just gone live on the website in the last hour or so. So we'll be working off that document, broadly speaking. And also just to draw your attention to the fact that there was a public forum statement that got lost in the system somehow. So that's from David Redgewell, who's unable to be here today. But we will note his statement. And hopefully you've had a chance to read it now. If not, you can read it immediately after this meeting. Okay, so let me just get to the right bit. So the supplement that's been published this lunchtime is just a short document, 15 pages long, which sets out the structure of scrutiny, how many meetings per year each of the commissions are expected to have, the ways of working, which we've discussed previously. So, and yeah, you can see those on pages 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. I think we're taking all of that as read and just focusing on the agenda, if everyone's happy with that. Okay. So our main focus here is our own agenda, that of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, but then we also need to sign off on the draft agendas proposed by the other scrutiny commissions. Lucy, did you or did anybody else have thought or preference on which order we do those things?
Well, it probably makes sense to start with the other ones and then work up to OSM.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay. Well, then, with reference to the document, does anyone have any concerns, issues, questions about the drafts produced from the other ones? Obviously, the vast majority of us were in that session just now, so we already had the opportunity to raise them. But if I know not everyone was, and if there's anything else. Yep, Martin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, while there's a formal list in the document, I think that we just drew up, what also matters is that to know is that in the discussion by members of Scrutiny Commission for communities, we're seeking various briefings, and we believe, the members believe, we can't make a full decision until after those briefings as to what the questions might be that we then want to scrutinise. And so the work programme will change. As long as it's understood, it's going to be an evolving document, building on what we find out, and the timescales for things that we don't yet know because they haven't been in the forward plan. So we don't yet know when certain things happen and the best time for us to deal with them. In addition, just one final thing, is we've got at least one more informal subgroup working on the issue of trees, and we might have another one, but that'll emerge as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Good things to point out. Do any of the other chairs want to highlight anything about their draft agenda in particular? Jeff?
Yeah, it was only that just looking at my notes, I realised that I missed out one thing from our work programme where we talked about having a detailed look at aspects of the capital spend versus budget, and that we would probably do that at our last meeting of the year once the budget process had been dealt with. And this is really because year on year the council falls behind on its capital spend, and whilst we don't think we'd be able to solve it any more than anyone else, that we ought to look at it and perhaps highlight one case where the project has been managed well and one where it's been managed badly. So that was an item, as I say, to go into our third or fourth meeting of the year.
Okay, great. So that was discussed in your breakout group. It just didn't make it.
That was discussed in the breakout group, and I forgot to mention it and feed it back in.
Okay, thank you for that. Do any of the other chairs or vice chairs want to chip in at this stage? Tim?
It was just a minor thing, but just to mention where we decided we want to look at the dedicated schools grant, I think it was quite rightly pointed out what that may or may not work with the finance task and finish group. So I'll work with Jeff to make sure we find a vehicle to be able to look at the dedicated schools grant from a performance and service point of view rather than just a finance point of view. Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Yes, that sounds like something that needs a bit more discussion, but definitely important to have it on there. Sarah, did you want to say anything from a growth and regen perspective? No, all covered? Okay, great. All right, well, with those points noted, if there are no other points, then I suggest that we formally move to agree those parts of the work programme. Shall I take that as read? Yes, okay, great. Your mic's still on, by the way, Jeff. Great, all right, so moving on to our work programme for Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. This is where I've got too many different things to look at the same time. We don't have a screen up as either. Sorry, bear with just a sec. I've got this one, but there was, yeah, that's fine, okay. Okay, so sorry about that. So the draft plan, obviously, just to explain for anybody watching from home, the workshops that we had with all scrutiny members this morning had breakout groups that looked into in detail what they were going to be looking at over the year. Overview and Scrutiny Management Board has not yet done that because most of our Overview and Scrutiny Management Board membership are the chairs of the individual scrutiny commissions, so they were too busy in that. So this is now us doing that equivalent process for our own commission. So the proposals here are currently more draft and need a more detailed discussion. So currently penciled, we've got for our next meeting, which will be 18th of October at 2 p.m, an agenda item on City Leap. So we had one at our last meeting. This one will be probably have to be exempt because it will be looking at things that are commercially sensitive. But the Osm Leads agreed that that was important in order for us to have input at a timely stage in the City Leap procurement process. So I assume there are no objections to that one being on there. We'll also be looking at the corporate performance report, quarter one, and the corporate risk report as standard. For those who noted that we touched on performance very briefly in the previous Osm meeting, I think we can agree that we'll be looking at those in more detail and spending more time on them this time around. And when will those reports be available? Will we be able to look at them sufficiently in advance of the meeting that we can identify what the hot issues are?
Yes, quite possibly. So I'll come back to you, members, if that's okay, with a definitive date. But a colleague is liaising with them to get the date. So I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, if we can get you a draft early, then we will.
Great. And again, for anyone watching from home, the reason I ask that is that we're determined to improve our scrutiny of performance reporting, and part of doing that is looking at the reports sufficiently before the meeting that if you've got particular questions about problematic areas, we can invite the relevant council officers to attend to answer our questions directly in the meeting. Yep, Graham.
In terms of the exempt items, we'll be able to have them electronically, or will it still be as before? We have to come in and sign documents in a locked room.
No, so we've moved away from having the paper access now for exempt materials. So wherever possible, we will do it for you via managed access on modern.gov.
Microphone issues, sorry about that. So those are all of the scheduled items for the October meeting. And I'm just going to 18th of October, 2 p.m. I think we already have that in our diaries.
Yeah.
We do, don't we? Yes. Okay, so our members should already be holding that clear. I'm not going to get us to agree each month as we go. We'll go through them all, and then, because there might be something that we need to move somewhere else as we go along. Okay, so, and there's some things that don't have dates allocated yet. So currently, they're not in February next year. Week commencing 7th of February, we'll be looking at the business plans of the council-owned companies. That has to be that week because of how it fits into the time frame of the business planning cycle and when things subsequently go to Cabinet. So assuming we're agreed that it's a good idea for OSM to look at those business plans, then I'm afraid it's not up for debate when it happens. Are there any questions or concerns about that? Jeff?
Yeah, well, first thing being really pedantic, but I think it might be useful to actually list the company's business plans that we're going to look at. That will avoid anything inadvertently slipping through the net. And I specifically raised the question of the Heat Networks business plan, because the others, we saw annual business plans a year ago, or a year for this current year, and I'm guessing that therefore Gorham and Waste and Holdings will be doing the same. But Heat Networks, we didn't, because it was still starting up. And I think we need to know what we are going to see, and that it shows us the longer term future of that business, because it is a long term business, and therefore a 1 or 2 year business plan isn't sufficient to see the viability of what it's going to do. So I'm just flagging that up, that I think that might be a separate issue, not least because the management of the other companies know what we're looking for, because they've brought business plans a number of times. Whereas the Heat Network, we need to make sure that we give a very clear brief on what we expect to be seeing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yes, if we can make sure that in the published work programme it does name the individual companies, because members of the public that are trying to find information about those companies are much more likely to search our website for the name of that company rather than the phrase company's business plans. So yeah, for that reason, if nothing else. Regarding the Heat Network, yes, we should liaise with them about what that looks like. I will, can you give me an action to do that, although I may come to you for specifics? Mark.
Thanks, Chair. I should have said at the beginning of the meeting that I'm no longer a director of any of the council companies. Just so that's a kind of a declaration, I guess. Just to support what Jeff said, that it's important that we understand which of the companies that we are scrutinising. My point was slightly different in that obviously the point of time in February fits in with when the business plans are scheduled to go to Cabinet, but it's a long way off and these companies are going through some change, and it would be useful at some point, perhaps informally, just to have a snapshot of where the businesses are, particularly in light of the Grant Thornton recommendations as well. So is there some way that we can just have a kind of an update without having a big debate, just so that we understand where the businesses are and where the governance issues are as well?
I wonder if we could have something in the papers for the October meeting that's not tabled for discussion, but just for OSM members update. And while we're on roughly that topic, most of you will probably be aware that as chair of OSM, I sit on the shareholder group as an observer. So not a decision maker for the shareholder group, but I get to sit into those meetings. And as per a discussion in a previous OSM meeting, I've asked for the minutes of those meetings to be shared with all OSM members. They will have to be confidential because they're commercially sensitive, so they can't be published. But the advantage in my mind of you all being able to see those minutes as well is that we're not relying on just one person to spot every possible issue. I will do my best, but it's really helpful to have all of you casting an eye over those when you receive them as well. And in response to a question or feedback I got from one of you, might have been Tim, I can't remember, that we need to make sure that they come to the rest of OSM members in a timely fashion and not 3 or 4 months later when everything in them's out of date. I made that point very clearly at the shareholder group meeting. There will obviously have to be a few weeks delay while the minutes are written up, sent back to shareholder group for feedback to confirm that they're sure it's a correct record, but it will be weeks, not months. So that will start happening soon. And give me a prod if it doesn't, but but yeah, should be in place soon. So that will help as well with you keeping up to date with what's going on with the companies.
Chair, for clarity, I apologise for my late arrival. I've been in Bath at a West of England scrutiny meeting this morning. An interest, I am a director of Bristol Waste now.
Okay, thank you. If we can note that. Lovely.
Chair, may I just flippantly ask Councillor Pearce if that means he'll be changing the photo on his Zoom meeting so that we see some waste containers in the background rather than the nursery.
That's my greenhouse.
Okay, so at the moment in the draft work plan, companies' business plans is the only thing on the agenda for week commencing 7th February. I don't propose it stays that way, but that's what we've got there for now. So I'm going to keep going through the timetabled things and then we'll get to where we slot in everything else in a moment. So then in March 2022, exact date to be confirmed, we've got the Bristol City Council business plans, so for the council's own work, that is, and it's been suggested that that item could include looking at recommendations and the progress on the recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly. So the Citizens' Assembly made a number of recommendations. In one of them in particular, they specifically named Scrutiny and asked Scrutiny to monitor progress on, someone tell me if I've misremembered, I think it was decarbonisation of homes, if I remembered correctly, I think. But, you know, arguably we could contribute on monitoring progress on a lot of the Citizens' Assembly recommendations, not necessarily just that one. And given that some of the recommendations have been or will be folded into those business plans anyway as part of the council delivering the council's part of them, it could potentially be one big item. I'm just going to, before I put that out to the room, just going to jump ahead to the items yet to be scheduled list to point out that another of them is delivery of net zero carbon by 2030. Obviously that's the council's target for the whole city, and several years have passed now since we set that target, so a number of councillors and members of the public have asked to see how progress is going on that, and I think that falls to Scrutiny and probably to OSM, since it's cross-cutting across all parts of the council to look at that. But that is a very big topic, so we would need to make some decisions about which aspects of the decarbonisation we're looking at specifically, how we're looking at them, whether we're just looking at the council's part in it or the whole city's, and so on, which is a huge conversation. I doubt that we will get a definitive answer in the next 25 minutes of this meeting, but we might want to set some actions to go away and do that and consider whether that's all part of the same big business plan and Citizens' Assembly thing or separate. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. We've been discussing decarbonisation at West of England Scrutiny this morning, and there was much conversation there about the activities and the input from the unitary authorities. So a conversation between yourself, DEM services here, and West of England Scrutiny and DEM services there might be opportune in order to prevent a duplication of work. Because we're all confronted with a massive task.
Yep, that's a fair point, and a similar point was raised in the workshop this morning. It was specifically around growth and regen in that case, but yeah, there's obvious overlaps with our counterparts on WECA scrutiny. Could you get an action for me to set up that meeting with probably not only me, but people from at least growth and regen as the scrutiny that probably interfaces most with WECA?
I wonder actually whether there might not be opportunity to work in cooperation with the other unitary authorities as well, seeing as there are some activities that take place cross-border.
Yep. Yep, that's fine. I feel like I'm taking a lot of actions today. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, following on from that, I see we've also have certain other things potentially on our work programme, and that includes the One City plan as well. There are bodies both at the WECA level and the city level, like the new board being proposed for WECA to set up a climate board or advisory board on that. And there's a climate advisory board here in the city, and loads of the actions needs to be mapped out in a way that does make sense for scrutiny. So which bits are the authorities dealing with, which bits are the private sector dealing with, which bits is government dealing with, and so on. And the trick for us will be to see how we can have an effective scrutiny of the bits we can then influence most, and also know who else has to play their part, like the new WECA board that's been set up, or the various bodies under the One City sort of structures, like their environmental sustainability board and their climate advisory board. And we could get a lot of information from them, but what we need to do is then sift which bits are most relevant to us, I think. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Do members have thoughts on the format for scrutinising the kind of decarbonisation agenda as part of or separate from business plans? Is it just a single agenda item at OSM? I would suggest probably not. Is it a subgroup? Is it an inquiry day? Is it some combination of those? Do people, Tim?
I think given the size of the work, but also the urgency, probably a subgroup would be something which we should consider. I mean, you might want to bring a report here first, but I can certainly see that it requires a bit of intense work. If we want to look at this, we probably want to be looking as best we can across the city, not just what the city council does, because that really is of quite a minor element compared to our carbon outputs across the city. So I would have thought something along those lines is something we could do with actioning.
Yeah, so initial report here and then give a subgroup actions from that. I'll come to you two in a minute, Steve.
Yeah, perhaps lobbing a grenade in the middle of the lake here. A subcommittee of the whole committee, or a subcommittee of the whole house perhaps, given the size of the task. I think the most important thing to avoid is being tied to this committee's meeting timetable, because we need to move a bit quicker than that. Did that make any sense at all?
Sorry, yes, it did. I was just drinking water, so I wasn't able to give the
sorry.
adequate response. Yes, no, it did. Is it constitutionally permissible to have a subgroup of the scrutiny function altogether, rather than just of a particular committee? I'm not sure.
It would be a subgroup of OSM, I think, would be the
Technically,
best.
but it could have members from, we can
yeah.
invite members from any scrutiny commission.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, I'm leaning towards that. Martin and then Jeff.
Thanks. Yeah, just building on that's a very helpful sort of approach. And bear in mind, we can also invite external experts to be members or advisors to a body like a subgroup. What I think then has to follow is that when we've worked out who's doing what and whether it's effective, how, you know, what our input might be, then we need to know what is in our business plan and what is in our corporate plan, because the council has to play its part. And when it plays its part, it usually puts funds in the business plan and commitments in the corporate plan. So to some extent, there's an iterative process, but we then need to know what's coming and when, and is it getting on with it at the right pace for the climate emergency.
Jeff?
Yeah, number of points. One is the comment Steve made about working with WACA, and I would certainly see some real benefits in doing that. And one of the challenges, which is a sub-issue for us, is the fact that WACA often claims that things it's doing on behalf of the local authorities when we try to scrutinise it at WACA, but when we try and scrutinise it in Bristol, we're told it's being done on behalf of WACA. So there is an interesting imbalance there, and I think therefore for something as important is how we're dealing with carbon net zero, it's actually even more important that we get the accountability right, because we have to remember, my understanding, that WACA can only do anything if all the unitaries agree. So actually there has to be some working there. The other thing, if I can lob another challenge following on from Steve's, is that this is so important that I'm not precious about it being a scrutiny group. I would have no problem with a cabinet member being involved in the process and a senior officer being part of the process. I accept the Constitution might not allow that, but I mean, this is an emergency. We've got to work out ways to make it work most effectively and happen most effectively, and not be controlled by timetables of predetermined meetings. So could we try and give a little bit of thought on really what is the best vehicle to make this accountable, but to do it in a way that we're working with the administration? I don't see this is something that's challenging. It's simply a way of making sure that it stays at the top of the agenda, and we as backbenchers are updated on what's happening and can see that there is continued action.
Yeah, I would suggest that probably the official format of that would be an OSM subgroup where we invite the cabinet member to attend with quite a strong steer that we need them. And obviously there's one cabinet member in particular, but there might be other cabinet members that we want to invite for specific bits that are related to their portfolio.
Just to update you members, I had picked up an action previously to talk to Councillor Beach about this potential piece of work, and she is very interested in having the conversation, but due to diaries we hadn't managed to arrange that before the workshop today, but I'll get to it as soon as I can.
Thanks. Yeah, we're not going to be able to decide the exact shape of that. I take it from the responses that everyone agrees that's a priority, and that it being a climate emergency, we should get to it sooner rather than later. I would suggest that probably, I mean, October is already a bit full for our agenda, but if it is just coming to the October one in order to delegate to a working group, then it could go to that. If it needs to come back to OSM for something substantive, then I would suggest that happens in February, where there's currently lots of space. But yeah, if we can in October set that working group up, then that would be great so they can get started. Yep.
Yeah, could Leeds perhaps have a discussion around that to help advance that, to expedite that?
Yes, I think we have.
I used the phrase this morning in Bath, urgent and effective. So, yeah.
I can't remember when our next...
Committing our group's lead to an action there.
I think we've got an OSM Leeds in the diary in the not too distant future. It's on the 6th of October, so if we can ask for that to go on the agenda there to get things going. For members of the public, OSM Leads is a preparatory meeting where we finalise the agenda for each of our meetings, and it's made up of one representative from, well, at least one representative from each party, and the chairs, basically. Okay, where are we? Okay, so jumping back to the draft plan in the document, the other thing currently in there for March is the Scrutiny annual report to full council. As the name implies, that is annual. And so that just, we have to prepare it, and that's the time we're going to be doing it. So I assume there's no objections to that. Okay, and then provisional items to be scheduled. So one city plan, Martin, you touched on this before. I do not recall what specific aspect of the one city plan we were going to be looking at for this agenda item. Can somebody remind me?
Well, if I could comment, certainly how I understand it, Chair. There are a lot of, it's a partnership document, and we're often told that's being dealt with by the one city plan or strategies flowing from that. But lots of them are ones where the council is a key partner, either a lead partner or a junior partner, perhaps. And what we need to do is go through it, as I understand it, so that we know what commitments the council is making and what part the council will be playing. Because we may well need to scrutinise that in conjunction with all the other things we think are being done by the council to iron out contradictions or to make sure the gaps are filled.
Okay, so the particular angle we're taking on the one city plan there is making sure that the council is taking responsibility and starting work on the bits that the council has its name against effectively in that plan. Good, just making sure so that we're not just sort of signing off reports for the sake of it.
Or should have its name against.
Or should have its name against.
There might be another piece of work which is how is that overall plan kind of having its impact on the city? And I'd say that could have merit too, but that would be a very different take on it, the impact of that one city plan on the city as a whole.
Yeah, okay. So it's a kind of is work on getting going or ongoing on those items. That sounds good to me. Any other input on that? Everyone happy that that comes to us? And that's one that doesn't yet have a date attached to it. Before I suggest a date, I'm just looking at the other things in the to be scheduled list. Okay, so at the moment, so OSM usually has 6 meetings per year. At the moment, we've had July, and we're planning to have, well, we've got this one now, but this one doesn't really count, so it's not a full one. So then we've got October, February, and March. So that's 4. So we can, so we're expecting to have 2 more, for which the dates are not yet. Or up to 2 more. We don't have to have our 6, but there is resource for us to have up to 6, so it makes sense for us to use that. So one city plan. Does anyone have input on particular timing that is attached to that would make sense for it to come at a particular time? If not, I suggest that we ask the scrutiny officers to fit that in at a time that makes sense around other agenda items, if that's all right. But I guess as early as there is space, so that we're keeping later OSM scrutiny meetings clearer for things that will arise throughout the year. Okay, next thing on the to be scheduled is commercialisation and innovation update. Who wants to introduce or speak about that? what was the background to that getting on there? Yep, Jeff, thought it might be you.
Well, this is a topic, and Steve knows even more about it, or a lot more about it than I do, but this is a topic that seems to me to be pretty fundamental to the council, and one I got involved in when it was clear that there is limited sources of additional income for the council, and therefore being commercial and innovating could be one way of generating more income. And that approach seemed to gain a lot of support from all four parties. But the change in the way it's managed, as opposed from a dedicated officer responsible for it to being subsumed into growth and regen, means that it's not an issue that appears as a line anywhere in the council's budget. And whilst it is in growth and regen, it is an area that affects the whole council. And there could be an argument for it being a resources issue, because it's about whether we are investing our resources wisely. But it's probably, it almost certainly is an OSM issue, because it is so cross-cutting. But I think, Steve, was it over 100 different potential sources of commercialisation activity identified where the council is performing a commercial service but not necessarily running it commercially, where it could be done in a way that could generate funds that could support other services? And this is really, as far as I'm aware, sat in abeyance, and not a great deal happening, and not any particular process for determining how to prioritise what happens. And the first stage was to suggest that we could have a report on this to OSM to then identify where we might go. I spoke with Don Alexander the other day, because Don was a member of the working group with Steve and myself, and was it Clive Stevens as well was part of that? And certainly he is one of many who would like to find out how we can make this happen. But my feeling is that we could be a little bit of a catalyst to encourage the administration, and perhaps give Steve more strength to lobby his colleagues to look at the opportunities here, because the potential could be enormous. But every month or year we let this go is lost opportunities when others are grabbing them.
Yep, I think that's a compelling argument. I'm very happy to have that come to OSM. Steve, go on.
Yes, I'd be very happy for it to come to OSM as well. There's a divergence of opinion on this, and there are arguments in favour of both opinions. One is that if you make it somebody's responsibility, everybody points fingers and says that's his job or her job. And the other is that you say, actually, it's everybody's job. And the danger with it being everybody's job is that everybody thinks it's somebody else's job. So it would be good to have a look. I think that there are lots of opportunities. As Jeff said, there were over 100 items on our short list, which was pretty much off the top of our heads, really. There's surely lots more. There's whole issues around prioritising and adequacy of resources in an authority that is already pretty stretched, really, even more so with climate and ecological emergencies. But no, I think it would be good to say, hey, what about for OSM?
Yeah. How would people feel if, for that one, rather than just having the officers that are looking at it in Bristol City Council, that we get someone external, either from another council that's been doing good work on this, or potentially from either the LGA or I I know there are various like think tanks and whatnot. Yeah, go on, Steve.
I'm the council's representative at APSI, and I would get into trouble with the
Tell the public what APSI is.
The Association of Public Service Excellence. And they have a whole team working on commercialisation, and inviting them to come along or speak to us over Zoom would be something that I would recommend, never mind anything else. I've been banging the APSI drum for 8 years now, and the more engagement we can get with them, the better.
Yep, I'm fine with that. Can I pass that action to the scrutiny officers to investigate what might be available? And APSI might not be the only other organisation. I'm scrabbling around in my head for a talk that I went to by someone that wasn't APSI, that was about local authority commercialisation, that I will go away and try and remind myself who they are outside of this meeting. Mark?
I think this is a really good issue for OSM to lead on. I think a start point, and I agree with having somebody external, is just to understand the council's approach to commercialisation. Maybe commercialisation is the wrong word to use, but our overall approach and officer thinking would just be a good start point. There is also a correlation between this agenda and the companies, because some of that commercialisation possibly lives within the companies. So I'm not sure about timing, but to try and get a connection between our review of the business plans, understanding where the council is in terms of its longer term thinking around commercialisation, and actually learning what some other places have been doing, because there are some other places that have been very proactive on this, and you know, let's learn from things that have gone well elsewhere. So I endorse this on the agenda, but I think it connects into some other areas of our activity as well.
Yeah, sure. Martin?
Yeah, thanks. Just to sort of add one other aspect to this, because so I agree with everything that's been said, and it's both an investment and it's a source of revenue income for the future. But we discussed this in quite some depth some years ago, and it's certainly timely to sort of go back. When we were thinking about things like the park services, library services and so on. And I think there's a balance to be struck between looking at how we maximise revenue, arguably, or secure revenue that will support the services, and also what the users' experiences are and what the benefits to the community are. And we could let large concession kind of deals with sort of major players and get a very high amount of income from that. But we could also do it very differently and allow local services and local facilities to make the best arrangements they can locally. And that helps a very different objective, which is the community wealth building and getting the maximum benefits and connections to the communities that are using those services and that surround those areas and places. So I hope we'll look at it not from only a financial point of view, but from all the other social and economic and environmental benefits, and how we do it matters as much as how much of it we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other points on that, or do we feel that's enough of a steer for us to go away and get started? Yeah, okay. Okay, the other things on the provisional items to be scheduled list for us are twice yearly risk reports, quarterly performance reports, and standing items, forward plan, work programme, etc. I think we can take those as read. We don't need to discuss those, apart from to reiterate what I was saying about performance reports, that I suggest we take an approach of receiving them sufficiently in advance that we can, probably in the Leeds meeting, identify key areas and invite relevant officers to the main public OSM meeting, so that we're not just skimming over a performance reports document, but we're actually digging into the areas of interest. Okay, and then I had one couple of items that were raised verbally to me near the end of the workshop session that therefore didn't make it into this document. One was about, sorry, let me just get to the right bit. So we were having a conversation in the workshop about housing, and a point came up in the discussion in the plenary about alternative service delivery, things like community asset transfer, arm's length companies, and so on. Now, obviously, we have the shareholder group, which looks at some aspects of that, but it was suggested that we OSM might want to specifically look at how the council manages its relationship to the companies, i.e. kind of us looking at what the client service and the shareholder group and so on do. That was only sort of a point raised by one person in the workshop, so I guess I wanted to get a temperature check from the room on whether that felt like something that you wanted to look at, and if so, we could probably put it on the agenda of the same session as the company's business plans item. Well, even as part of that item, kind of weave it in. Do people have particular thoughts on that?
I think the client relationship, the shareholder relationship, and another relationship between those two is not as well understood as perhaps it could be. So a starting point might be to consider shareholder relationship, client relationship, and how the two talk to one another, because in the past they haven't always.
Do you mean in terms of a briefing to make sure members are up to speed?
Yes.
Before we start making comments about it?
Before we set hairs running, yes.
I think that's a very good point. Okay, so that would probably be a standalone briefing outside of the formal OSM meetings, and probably we would be asking OSM members to attend, but I would suggest that that could be available to all members for anyone else that's interested. So would it be possible to schedule that as a briefing, not desperately urgent, but before we, hang on a second, definitely before we look at the business plans in February. Yeah. And then after we've had that briefing, then we may want to then bring an agenda item probably to that February meeting, if that's all right. Lucy's ferociously taking minutes at high speed. The other potential agenda item to come to OSM was raised by an officer in the breakout in the workshop with resources, but it was because it somewhat relates to HR, but actually is more cross-cutting than that, so should probably come to OSM. And that was around the council updating various inclusion policies. So yes, that affects HR, but it affects, facilities and buildings and all sorts of things. It was mentioned that that would include some specific trans inclusion policies, because the council doesn't have those at the moment at a corporate level, but wouldn't only be that, it would be other aspects of inclusion as well. I checked with the officer, who confirmed that other sort of diversity and inclusion policies have come to OSM in the past, so we are the correct body for that. And since the officer leading on that work wants it to come to scrutiny, I think that's a good idea, and we should say yes, if that's okay with everyone.
I think so. I think there's a conversation there for you and Tim to have. Tim Y.
Oh, right, that Tim, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, so yeah, there was a discussion with the officer about whether it should only go to HR or HR committee, or whether it should also go to scrutiny, and I think probably both. And depending how much of a change those policies are, then it may go to public consultation as well. So if you can give me an action to talk to both the officer behind it,
Yeah.
Tim Borrett, and to Tim White from HR committee. That would be great. Okay, that is all of the things on my list, I think. I'm just going to throw it out to the room to see if there were any other things that are in your heads and aren't yet in the draft document. Jeff.
I'm not trying to be difficult, and I'm not coming up with a specific point, but just a question of how we deal with the forward plan, which, although it's improving, is still far from a complete document. And given this is our agenda-setting meeting, we clearly can't predict items that we don't know are coming or when they're coming. But we do need to identify whether we are anticipating that we will have meetings in time for cabinet meetings for items to be discussed if they are that important, or if we're not going to let that happen, we have to agree either that we are not going to have an opinion on items that come at short notice, or what the procedure would be for members of council or members of OSM registering a collective view. So one way or another, we need to resolve how we respond in that situation.
Yes, which reminds me to mention the statement that we as OSM members collectively approved and sent to Cabinet. Did you end up presenting that in person, Tim?
I did.
Thank you. Yeah, a number of us weren't able to be there, unfortunately. I have, for my sins, not watched back the recording, I'm afraid. Did you get a response from the Cabinet about that? Was there any update about what the forward plan might look like going forwards?
I made 3 statements to Cabinet, one on behalf of Overview Scrutiny Management Board, one on behalf of People's Scrutiny Commission, and one sort of myself. I have actually had a response from the Mayor on the one I made myself, but not on the other 2. But maybe that would come more formally to the committees, maybe, I don't know.
Yes, it was a statement rather than a question, so they're not required to respond. But tell you what, give me an action to follow up on that. We have been told that the current state of the forward plan isn't the final state and it will continue getting better. But I don't think we have an exact timeline for that timeline, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Okay, we are slightly over time. There is another meeting in this room in a few minutes. So, unless there's any other burning issues, I suggest we leave it there. We haven't given exact titles and timelines for every agenda item, but I think that we've given the scrutiny officers enough detailed instruction that they can then go away and draft something for us to look at over email. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, lovely. Thanks very much for coming along. Cheers.